Gossipnista here, your one and only source into the real lives of New Yorkers and what it's like to live in New York City. So is it all glitz and glamour? Where do you start? What should you know? And who am I? I'll tell you everything you need to know, and you'll thank me for it. XOXO Gossipnista. Hello, hey, welcome everyone to the Gossipnista podcast. I'm your host, Mariana Monks. Appreciate you tuning in and joining me. And oh, do we have a fun topic for you today, which may or may not be a little controversial. We're talking and comparing NYC versus LA, two of the largest and widely known cities in the US, and only adding to that good old feud of West Coast versus East Coast and which is better. We're debunking stereotypes, sharing the pros and cons of each city, where the better lifestyle and opportunities are, plus so much more. So you'll want to tune in and stay for the whole interview. You know, coming from LA myself and now living in the Big Apple, I think I get a pass on just being able to talk about this subject. And so my hope is to bring you a new series with conversations and different guest perspectives throughout the Gossipnista podcast on NYC versus LA. And if you're passionate about this topic and want to get involved and want to share your thoughts, be sure to DM me on Instagram at Gossipnista Podcast or email me at gossipnista@gmail.com. Furthermore, my amazing guest today is Claire Shay, a sustainable lifestyle blogger who lives in New York City, but has called both LA and NYC her home. She lets her immense love shine throughout our conversation for one of the cities. However, Claire gives a refreshing and introspective look into both New York and LA and life in both of them. So whether you live in any of the two cities or are currently looking to move to one of them or just learn more about them, I'm hoping new light is shined for both the Big Apple and the City of Angels in our interview today. So without further ado, guys, here is my interview with Claire Shay. Hey, Claire, how are you? Welcome to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
I am very excited to be on. This is the highlight of my day. So, I got a new apartment today, so this definitely still beats it. I'm very excited to be
Oh
here.
my gosh, and you made the time to come on the podcast. So thank you a trillion times over. And we'll have to hear about that in a second. But wow, a new apartment and a podcast in the same day.
I know, it's a big day.
It's a huge day. And I'm also super excited about our topic today, which is, NYC versus LA. And before we dive into that, Claire, I like to start off by just kind of knowing your New York story and knowing if you're originally from New York. Are you a native?
I am not. I've been here for 5 years now. I moved in 2016 in April, and I've been here ever since. And the new apartment I just signed is a 2-year lease, so I will definitely be here for at least another 2 years.
Oh, wow.
Which is going to be exciting because when we get to that point, that's going to be 7 years, which is crazy if you think about it.
7 years is a long time. And that's officially a New Yorker. I feel like 7 years is the mark I've been hearing with my guests. So that's pretty awesome. So you just moved into this apartment. You moved to New York 5 years ago. And, where did you essentially move from or come from?
Yeah, so I was actually born in Taiwan, and my family moved to Los Angeles when I was 6, almost 7. And I grew up in LA. I went to grade school there. I went to college there. After college, I lived very briefly for 1 year in Utah. Wasn't really my vibe. And then after that, I moved to New York City. So technically, I just, I didn't move here directly from LA, but I mean, it's still basically the same thing. I've known LA my entire life. And so this is very different.
Very much so, because I'm from LA too. But so what made you make the move to New York?
Yeah, so at the time, I just wanted something different. And my boyfriend has always been wanting to move to New York. And so for him, this was like his dream come true. For me, it was like, yeah, I'll go visit New York, but I love LA. I love everything about LA. I would be very happy to live there for the rest of my life, but he always wanted to come here. So personally at the time, in terms of my career, like I was just kind of getting started. I didn't really know what I want. So I just decided to say yes on a whim, and I moved out here with him. I would definitely say the first year was really difficult because it was kind of like a, why the heck did you do this? You are out of your mind.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think over time that sentiment has definitely changed. And recently we were just thinking ourselves about, you know, like whether or not we want to move back to LA. And we just made the decision to stay here for at least another 2 years and then kind of reevaluate. So I definitely feel like even though that first decision to move here wasn't really, you know, a logical one, I definitely think there were logical decisions to stay in New York after that.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, a lot of people come to New York to kind of find themselves, right? And there's also a lot of opportunities here. And it's also crazy to hear. It's not so often I hear that someone's looking to stay in LA and loves LA versus New York, and it wasn't, you know, your first choice. So we'll definitely dive into that. I'm so happy you've been loving it since. And again, signed at least 2 more years here. So that is awesome. And about signing a lease, what neighborhood did you come from and what neighborhood are you living in now?
Yeah, I've been in the Upper East Side the entire 5 years that I've been here. We were on the 80s, like right by the water. So we were on East End Avenue. It's an amazing area, but we just found ourselves spending the majority of our time just in Midtown and downtown. My work before everything was remote was all the way in downtown. And it was just kind of getting to a point where even though we love the Upper East Side, we love Yorkville, it's just we don't really spend our time here. So we also were just looking for a change in terms of our apartment. We are currently on the first floor in our old apartment, and that just was not working anymore for anybody. We need fresh light. We need to be on a higher floor, and so we found an amazing apartment in Hudson Yards. It's on 37th Street and 10th. And it's just 3 blocks above that like Hudson Yards Mall. And we're going to be on a higher floor. And so it'll be really exciting. I'm just really excited about being able to be somewhere new. And who knows, maybe I'll love it there. Maybe I'll still prefer uptown. But I think 2 years is a good enough time to kind of like try it out and see how I feel. And then maybe move to another neighborhood afterwards.
5 year commitment, that's a good amount. And now Hudson Yards, that's like such a different area and also so fun, right? By the High Line and closer to downtown, Midtown, you know, West Village and so forth, Chelsea. That is going to be an exciting ride, like not ride, but just change. And so what has your overall experience been just living in New York?
Yeah, it's interesting when I think about me living here because I think for the majority of the time I lived here, I had such a love-hate relationship with the city.
Right.
It's weird, but I love every single part of LA. I love that you get the big city and you get like the suburbs. I love the beach cities versus the more downtown areas. I love that you're just so close by everything else. And so when I came to New York, I always kind of just thought about it from the perspective of someone who's from Los Angeles. It was weird to me to kind of feel so far away from the beach, or, you know, the beaches here look very different than in Southern California. The concrete jungle is just, you know, it's so overwhelming. And I have this like paralyzing fear of birds, and there's just like pigeons on the street everywhere. It's disgusting to me. And I also have a deadly fear of rodents, and they're also everywhere on the street. So I think from all perspectives, like the outside looking in is kind of like, I wouldn't really have had a great experience in New York. But I think over the last 5 years, what I've discovered is that the people here and the inspiration that I get from being in New York, and just with all of that combined, it changes the way that I view the city. And I definitely think during quarantine, kind of, you know, being stuck indoors is one thing, but not being able to go and explore the different neighborhoods and like go to all the places that I love, it definitely gave me an appreciation for New York City and kind of just how much I've grown to actually love where I am. And when we were thinking about moving back to Los Angeles, I was so excited, but I also knew that like, hey, like I would miss a lot of parts about New York. So it's interesting. It's definitely been kind of a bumpy ride. But I have loved it here so far.
Oh, wow. I am hearing that you still have this immense, your first love is almost LA. And
Mhm.
I can see that through and through our conversation, which is awesome. Because I'm going to say, one, being from LA, my first love, I think, is New York. So I'll represent the New York, you'll represent the LA, or we'll both do the same since we're both from there. But that is great to know that, you kind of grew to love New York. I do want to know, I wouldn't say like there's rodents everywhere. I mean, do you see them around? I don't,
I see them everywhere. I don't know if it's because I look for them. I'm so conscious of them. I see them
yeah, when
everywhere.
you look for things,
And
you
yeah.
definitely see them. I see them in the subway tracks. That's about the only place I see them.
Oh gosh, no, I see them in the streets and it just bothers me. I can't. I see them in every single neighborhood that I'm in. It's horrifying. Every single neighborhood I go to, I see them. Ugh,
Oh my,
ugh.
you've officially scared anyone from coming to New York. That's okay though. Yeah, they are definitely, a staple of New York. So let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
And they don't bug you. They really don't. But so you kind of mentioned there, some essential likes and dislikes about New York, because that was my follow-up question. Anything else you kind of like to throw in there?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that there's something about New York City that makes the people just different. And I think the people is really the best part about New York because they're what makes the city, they're what gives the city life and vibrancy. And I think during COVID, really what we saw was that, everyone was stuck at home. You couldn't really be out and about, but that's not what really changed the city. It was really about so many people leaving, this lack of ability to be able to feed off of the positive energy from other people, to feed off of their motivations and like the soul of the city. To me, I think the best part about New York is really the people
Mhm.
and the energy that you get from the city that people always talk about. Like, oh, I come to New York, I'm just so energized, I'm so inspired. I just really feel like that comes from the people who make the city like that, from all of their hard work, all of the dreams that they have that they go after. I definitely think you see that everywhere, but I think you see the most of it in New York. And I think you kind of see, in some ways, the best of the best of the people who just want to make it big, and they're all in New York. Everyone has such big dreams and everyone's going after them and working hard and also just enjoying life. And I think that's really what is so amazing about the city. That is, it's hard to describe until you're here and really fully immersed with New
Love it.
Yorkers.
Love that. I totally agree with you that it's the people. Really, it feels like a community here in New York, more so than what I would say I ever
Mhm.
felt in California, right? And especially because of the pandemic, it just brought people that much closer together. I mean, you're already in close proximities, but everyone just kind of pulled together, do all the appropriate things that needed to be done, stay safe,
Mhm.
and so forth. And
Totally agree.
but just the perspective of do you ever have plans to move away from I mean, you kind of already answered that. Maybe 2 years down the line, you'll reevaluate if you're heading back to LA. Anywhere else besides LA you may consider?
That's a great question. I mean, I would definitely still love to live abroad. If I ever had the opportunity, I won't turn that down. But in terms of other cities that I would live in, I would say that's really just Los Angeles. We briefly considered San Francisco, but that's not really my vibe. It's not really my boyfriend's vibes. So I think if we were ever to move, it would be back to Los Angeles. I would love to have the flexibility to be in both places because I just know that even when we do move back to Los Angeles, I'm going to miss being in New York. And I also know that, I've been in New York for 5 years and I still miss Los Angeles quite a bit. So
Mm,
I think for me, ideally, I'd love to be bi-coastal, however that would work.
love it. And so given all that's happened in New York in 2020 and you being here for 5 years and
Mhm.
really knowing the vibrancy of the city prior to the pandemic and now, how it looked after the pandemic, I know we're still semi in it, what do you think with regards to the city? Do you think it'll return back to what it used to be?
Yeah, I think it's such a great question because I almost think back to this instance that happened to me sometime. I want to say 2019, obviously 2019 because it wasn't earlier than that and it wasn't 2020. Sometime in 2019, there was some kind of helicopter crash. It crashed into one of the buildings into Midtown. It was completely an accident, wasn't like a terrorist attack or anything like that, but I just remember hearing from friends who worked down there. My boyfriend was working down there at the time, I believe. It was just hearing from everyone about how scary that was crazy because people were clearly thinking about the 9/11 attacks and it shakes you to your core. And so I almost feel like after we come out of this pandemic, I almost imagine something so similar where all of us New Yorkers who, we were in the city, we don't have a second home somewhere else. Like we had to be stuck in our, like 500 square feet apartment. I definitely feel like it's going to be like this experience that we're going to come out of it. And it's almost just like this big inside joke with all of us New Yorkers who were here during the pandemic of like, yeah, I remember that time we had to like spend a whole year indoors in our like 500 square feet apartments. Like, I think it'll go back to normal, but I definitely think that, it'll be something where it really leaves a mark on New Yorkers. And I just think that we're such a resilient bunch, but, we don't forget, and things like that are really impactful. So I can't imagine that we would get to a point where, like we would completely stop feeling the implications of COVID. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where, like we forget what happened. I just think it's so huge.
Well, I love that you kind of reference back to September 11th and, that you have, as I do, that, New York will be the vibrant city it once was. So I appreciate that, Claire. And so with regards to talking about New Yorkers a lot, what do you think it means to be a New Yorker? And do you believe that you have to live here 10 years to become one and so forth? Like, what's your thought on that?
It's interesting because I will definitely say before the pandemic, I did not think about myself as a New Yorker. I lived here, but it wasn't like, yes, New Yorker. If we would go and travel, I would always say, yeah, I live in New York, but I'm from Los Angeles. And something during the pandemic definitely shifted in me where I definitely started thinking about myself as a New Yorker. And I think it's just, to me, a New Yorker is someone who's lived the life of the city. And, I know people feel like you have to be here for a certain time, but to me, being in New York is kind of, about like braving the weather. You have to, you can't just jump into your car and, like warm up during the winter. You have to walk all the way to the subway. You have to then deal with the subways being late. And you have to kind of, go through all of those like weather challenges. And being in New York also means that you have like inevitably all of us likely started off with some apartment that was way too small and we had to learn how to downsize. I think a lot of that just kind of comes with what I feel like New York is. Like, I just think we have these common struggles of living in really just a tiny location that I think that if you went through those experiences and you've lived in New York for, the full year, all the seasons, you didn't like go escape to some other home, I would say you're definitely a New Yorker. I just think the winter one is a huge thing because winter in Salt Lake City in Utah was very different than winter in New York when you can't just jump into a car.
Okay, it's the car factor that distinguishes it,
The car is huge.
Having to brave the weather and walking the streets. And I think a reason why New Yorkers walk fast is to get the hell inside the subway or wherever they're going from the cold weather.
I agree.
But I love that you said only a year, kind of going through all the seasons of the city. And furthermore, like I literally have been here only for about a year and I'm moved here precisely during a pandemic. And so I would consider myself a New Yorker. If you brave that, then, anyone who's moved here.
Yep. I completely agree. I think if you lived in New York through the pandemic, I don't care when you moved here. I think you're a New Yorker. I mean, like who else would be stuck in like a 500 square foot apartment? Like everyone else has like this big, massive home. the pandemic definitely changes things.
Happy to hear that. And so what advice would you give to someone who is new to the city, who made the move during the pandemic, who's looking to make the move? Like what advice would you give them?
Yeah, the first one I would just say is just there, you're going to get overwhelmed, and that is just a fact that you have to accept. I think especially if, you know, the move was during the pandemic when things are a lot quieter. Inherently in New York, with having so many people, it's just that it's going to get a little bit crazy. My first piece of advice really is just to, you know, like tell yourself, hey, you're going to be a little bit overwhelmed with, you know, how many people there is. Like it's, you want to just go out into a restaurant and get dinner, like it's impossible because like everyone's making reservations or, you know, like putting their name on the list or something. It's just overwhelming to be surrounded by so many people. Especially when you start to go out and try to meet other people. Everyone's working towards something, you know, whether that is, you know, in a side hustle they have, in their own business that they're starting up, or in a corporate job. So everyone is working towards something and everyone's so focused. And I think that kind of energy with, you know, like paired by the fact that there's so many people, I just think that, I know for me, I just felt really overwhelmed, and I just felt like, you know, such a small fish in the sea. But I almost feel like in some ways, that's kind of what's great about it, is that there's so many different places that you can kind of like siphon off positive energy and positive vibe. I think if you know how to kind of turn around that feeling of feeling super overwhelmed into something that you can kind of use it to feed yourself in terms of inspiration, motivation, or whatever else you're looking for, I think it'll be a lot easier to deal with.
Good tip. I like that. And what advice would you give to a current New Yorker?
In terms of like dealing with life after the pandemic?
In general, yep, you could take it in that direction or whatever direction.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I almost kind of feel like for all of my New Yorkers who've been here, there's definitely a lot of people that I see who I think, you know, like me, maybe, you know, they didn't love being stuck indoors in such a small square footage during the pandemic. I think a lot of us felt that way. I kind of just think that, you know, for us, we've been so resilient about so many things, and we've just been amazing about, you know, masks and really, you know, following protocols and regulations. My hope is for everyone that after we kind of get back to normal, that we are, you know, really still following like all of the CDC guidelines. And, you know, like we all don't want to be stuck indoors for, you know, the rest of the good weather that we have here. So I really hope that everyone can just follow the rules, so then we can all just be done with this a lot quicker.
Very true. Yep, very true. The quicker, you know, I don't want to touch that subject, the vaccine.
Yeah, that gets a little bit that gets a little
tricky.
bit
Yeah, let's just follow the protocols and also enjoy what we can in New York at the same time. Final question with regards to your story there, Claire, is, you know, if you were asked what New York is, how New York makes you feel, and how you would essentially sum that up into either your own quote or a quote that's out in the universe, what would that quote be?
I don't even know how I would describe this, but the first thing that comes to mind when I heard that is just New York is this endless well of positive energy. Someone somewhere is living their best life and enjoying every single moment of their life, or just enjoying the fact that we can be alive and experiencing all of this different culture that we have around us. And positive energy and positive vibes and happiness from other people is infectious. And I just think that there is always someone in New York who can provide you that. And I think if you're the kind of person that feeds off of positivity like that, I don't think there's any better city than New York for that.
Oh, lovely, lovely, lovely. I definitely, I feel that energy for sure. So thank you so much, Claire, for sharing, you know, your New York story. Would kind of Love to now dive into that whole, NYC versus LA discussion. But before we jump into that, I definitely want to know more about your background. So tell us about that, and what do you do for a living, and again, if that relates to what ultimately brought you to New York. Gossipnista here. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I wanted to hop in here to ask that if you haven't yet, if you could please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen. This will help me reach more people and spread the word about New York City and those who love it. And if you want to stay up to date, be sure to follow @Gossipnista Podcast on Instagram. Now, back to the show.
Been a whole journey, but I kind of feel like New York was a place where I kind of discovered professionally what I was good at, but this was also really the place where I discovered my purpose, which is sustainability. I feel like sustainability, like climate change, like, all of those things were such a huge part of my life. Subconsciously, really, when I was growing up, we had very frequent like beach cleanups. We had like the garbage disposal and the compost in our home. And we always stressed the importance of not wasting water. And it felt like I grew up with a lot of consciousness around our impact and our footprint on the earth. But when I moved to New York, it was very different. I was used to like throwing down like scrap pieces of food down the sink and then using and letting the compost kind of take care of business. I wasn't used to having to throw them in the trash can or throw them into a separate compost bin to then drop off somewhere. It was a bit difficult for me, and I think through a combination of just so many things that happened earlier on in my childhood and as I was growing up, and paired with just kind of falling into a career that I never meant to do in the first place, just kind of from that grew my blog, which has been the basis for what I really kind of consider my life's purpose in some way. It was because of my blog and this feeling of just having so many things to share that I wrote my ebook and published it on Amazon. Just
amazing. Wait, let's stop there. So tell us your blog name and then tell us about your book.
Yeah, sure. So my blog, the website URL is just my name, MissClaireShay.com, but it is titled Reinventing Sustainability, which Reinventing Sustainability is also the name of my book. All of it kind of is stemming from what I view sustainability to be, because when I was here living in New York, I felt like it was so difficult for me to really connect my lifestyle with some of the more eco-friendly, sustainable lifestyles that I saw on Instagram. Like everyone was living so zero waste, so green, and it wasn't something that I was able to do because I just didn't have the money for that. I also didn't love, a lot of some of the fashion and beauty styles that I saw. It was very difficult for me to kind of reconcile where I saw sustainability as something that everyone should be able to achieve, no matter what your version of a sustainable lifestyle looks like. It shouldn't be this crazy thing where, you have to eat vegan and, you have to do things a certain way just because it just doesn't work for everyone. And I think, touching on the veganism point, my sister was vegan for a while, but she recently had to stop because she had so many health issues. And I just think, things like that is something that we cannot try to put everyone into one same standard. And so really what I try to advocate for in my book, on my blog, and through all of my content is just, finding ways to create that sustainable lifestyle for yourself. So long as I can give you inspiration to start living a little bit more sustainably in your own life, whatever that looks like for you in your life is, to me, perfectly acceptable, because I think we need to have more people just being conscious about the way they're living rather than a few people doing it absolutely perfectly.
That is very helpful. I love that you're doing that, and definitely got to check out your book. So before literally diving into New York versus LA, would you say sustainability and eco-friendliness comes from LA? Like it's more so an LA thing?
I definitely think in some ways it is. And that's not to say that New Yorkers don't care about it.
Of course.
I just think that in Los Angeles and in California, that's just so top of mind. Speaking from my own experience, I know obviously depending on where you live, this is a little bit different, but I grew up right by the beach. And when I was growing up, we were like in a perpetual state of a drought. And we were constantly being reminded of, consciously recycling, consciously going to beach cleanups and like not leaving your trash lying around on the beach when you're going there. And I think a lot of those things growing up was really top of mind for us, just because we weren't really kind of in this concrete jungle where I would really say a lot of the nature that you have like in Manhattan is only Central Park. And then if you want nature, you're going to have to go to other boroughs or just, outside of New York City itself. And so I definitely know that people also have their issues with Los Angeles, but I think in comparison, it was just a lot more top of mind, just because it's not that everywhere you look is some man-made skyscraper. So I definitely think it was a little bit more conscious in Los Angeles. And I think that's kind of really what pushed me to want to promote that a lot more while I was here in New York, because I also know that, in Los Angeles, everyone is just, a lot more of like a free spirit, and their lifestyles really reflect that. But in New York, we're New Yorkers. We're a little bit more type A. Like we like to have a structure. We like to have schedules. We are sometimes just like go. That's not really something that kind of vibes with us. And so I think with that difference, I can also see that some of the traditional movements for sustainability may not resonate with New Yorkers, who are just like, yeah, that doesn't resonate with me or my lifestyle. And so I can also see how that limitation of the movement had an effect on how New Yorkers might traditionally think about sustainability.
Yeah. And I love that you kind of respect those thoughts and perspectives, you put them both out there and into play. But again, the hope is sustainability is a good thing for our world as a whole. So totally on board there with you. And having mentioned some great differentiators with regards to NYC and LA there, and you live in both areas, I'm going to ask in a nutshell, like what would you say is the main difference between LA and New York?
There's a lot, but I kind of think it's the lifestyle difference. I think no matter what situation you are in life and what you're hoping to do, I think New York is really more go. I'm chasing after something so specific, and I need all of these resources, and this is the only city where I can do them. And I think that here in New York, we're just laser focused on things like that. And I think in Los Angeles, people are a little bit just more free with the way that they live their lives. I think, the Upper East Side is a little bit different. But I think, in New York in general, there's a lot less of like oh yeah, I'm just gonna like pop to brunch and do yoga and then maybe do an hour of work on my laptop and then, like watch television all night. It's a lot more of like all of us have a crazy schedule full of things that we're trying to get done in New York. And not saying one is better than the other, and definitely not saying that the city doesn't have a bit of both. But I think for me, in terms of at least the people that I know that live in Los Angeles, my experience there, and then also living here in New York, it's definitely a different kind of a lifestyle in terms of almost the intensity of the way you live.
I hear you. Like, so kind of almost describing a hustler go-getter mentality versus a more relaxed, easygoing type of a vibe.
Yes. And I definitely was very much like I could sit at home all day and watch television, which I still can. But I mean, that was very much me before I really moved to New York. And I met all these people who were just honestly just kind of shocked and inspired me was just how motivated they were to go after certain things. And I've just noticed that the most motivated people I've met in my life have always loved New York, even if they didn't live here.
Interesting observation. And I like that, New York put into high gear, again, your path and momentum. So that's awesome to hear. And so kind of diving into our NYC versus LA comparison here, like what are essentially one or two similarities NYC and LA might have in common, do you think?
I love that because I definitely think there are a lot. I think that everyone in both cities are the type that you don't settle for anything less than the best. And so in your life, if being successful means having a great job, then I think people of both cities really live that out. I think if your version of successful means having a family and raising that, I see people in both cities having that. I think that both cities are made up of people who are really going to dictate their own destinies and create their own lives and kind of take charge of the life that they want to live, no matter what it looks like. And I definitely feel like the city is made up of, both cities are made up of people who have defined success for themselves and for their lives and are really trying to live that out.
Yeah, you kind of sum that up pretty perfectly. So that's a great similarity. Just making it in both cities, which are two of the biggest. So yeah. And so diving into, you mentioned LA a couple times here and your love for it. What is it specifically that you love about LA, Claire? Please share with us.
For me, part of the reason why I loved being in LA was just that I felt like I was able to kind of be surrounded by other people who kind of made me relax a little bit more, because I feel like naturally I'm just kind of a little bit more uptight and gruff and, just kind of straight to the point of what I like and don't like. And definitely growing up, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way with being so opinionated. And, it was always like this feedback from like teachers that, like I was just so opinionated about so many things. And I think what I initially loved about Los Angeles is that I just was around all of these people who were so accepting of literally everything because people are so laid back. And I think that was one of the first things that kind of drew me to that. It's almost kind of like the opposites attract in terms of our personalities. So many people in Los Angeles, their personalities is like the complete opposite of mine. And so I think that's really at a young age what drew me. And then I think over time, the nature versus nurture stuff, it kind of then became, I love the good weather. I love being by the beach. I love the idea of just kind of being able to be free and like drive around and like have the wild open spaces. Like nowadays I still absolutely thrive off of that. And that's still one of my favorite things about being in LA.
Oh my gosh, wait, stop. I feel like I should insert a crashing, halting car here. Did you just say the driving aspect is something you love about LA?
Yes, it is. Oh my gosh. I feel like I know where you're gonna go with this, but yes. You're gonna ask about LA traffic, right?
I mean, that is the only thing LA is known for. That's all I ever lived in.
Oh my
That
gosh.
is LA.
I'll say this about LA traffic because this is a very interesting point. So my cousin, she obviously grew up with me in Los Angeles, and she recently moved back after living in Utah for a bit. So she moved back for about a year or two, and we were talking about LA traffic, and she was like, I forgot how bad LA traffic was. It was so horrible. And then I'm like, looking at the time, I'm like, oh girl, you're like driving on the 405 at like 4:30. Of course it's bad traffic. So to me, I mean, that's probably not how she was.
Girl, there's traffic anytime. There's traffic anytime. If it's only like a 10 or even 8 mile or 5 mile destination, it's probably going to take you 45 minutes to get there. And if there's traffic, it's going to take you 2.
But it's curious though, because I almost kind of feel like depending on where you go, I would almost argue that certain freeways, it's like that, but there are other ways to get there quicker. And so long as you know your way around that, I would say it's actually pretty I really want to say it's that bad.
I would still argue because native LAers know those back streets and you're using them like no tomorrow. So you're still swerving in between the traffic or the back streets and so forth and trying to get where you're trying to get. And you may make it 5-10 minutes earlier, but it doesn't change. Like
I would say the subways are just as bad. And if you ever travel by car in New York City, it's horrifying. I can't tell you how many times I've been late because of the subway and the delays. And after taking the subway for 5 years, like that's my thing. It's like, at least with the traffic, I know exactly how long it's going to take me. With my subway, I can't control it. So I know people hate it. I've never felt like it was a deal breaker. And New York traffic is also just as horrifying, and also driving in and out in the city is horrifying. I would never recommend it. We had to do it once, and I think I was scarred.
oh my gosh, no. One, I've never driven here. I would never drive here. But
See,
the
that's the point.
subway,
It's horrifying.
no, it is horrifying. If you are driving, kudos to you. Yeah, but so with regards to the subway, I've never had a delay that bad. So, still fairly new. The subway hasn't been as active during the pandemic and so forth. So I'm probably going to take your word there.
Wait till it's all full, and trains only come once 10 minutes every 10 minutes, and everyone's packed in and you literally can't move.
Yeah. So just plan accordingly with time, which will still take you like 2 hours like LA. But I like the fact that I'm hands-free and I can pretty much do whatever it is I want to and not have to think about, the experience of, crashing into someone in front of me or not being able to respond to a message or do some work or read a book and so forth.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's kind of like, being all about sustainability. It's just like, driving is bad, but I love having a car. I love driving. It's one of the things I really miss so much.
You are a different kind of person. I love it, Claire.
It's very calming to me.
Yeah.
So it's weird. I know most people don't agree with me, but I love driving, and I will always still firmly stick by the fact that I think traveling in New York is so much more difficult than in LA.
Well, I love that you gave us both perspectives. And so thank you for sharing what you love about LA. So what is it that you love about New York?
Oh my gosh, there's something about walking by the iconic places of New York and feeling all of the history there that just gets to me. I love walking by all of the places downtown and being like, George Washington was here. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I love going by all of like the different skyscrapers and kind of like seeing the story behind how they were built, and like thinking about all the times that New Yorkers lived through in New York, like through the Great Depression, through the war. And I love walking through the city and feeling like I'm a part of that bigger history. And it makes me feel like I'm a part of something bigger. And I absolutely love it. And I can definitely say I do not get that feeling when I walk in Washington, D.C. So I think it's very unique to New York.
Yes, New York is very historic. Thanks for sharing that. So what are some things that you feel LA is known for, and maybe some things that may be stereotypes?
Interesting. So like some stereotypes that are true and some that are false. So, I mean, we're just going to avoid that whole traffic question because like clearly that's very controversial right now. But I think some other things is that the stereotype of I want to say like the healthy lifestyle of like like green juices and like healthy bowls and like all of that. That is so true. Like that is so easily available in Los Angeles. Not that we don't have it in New York, but it's just I definitely think that like that aspect of a healthy lifestyle in Los Angeles is very true. I think maybe a stereotype that may not be as true. I want to say it's less of a stereotype that people think about it, but maybe just in comparison to New Yorkers being like such a tight-knit community, really having an identity. I think people from Los Angeles have that community, and I think we have that identity. I grew up watching Kobe Bryant as like on television as a basketball player, and I was so obsessed. Like he was my inspiration for how hard he worked. And I just remember, after that horrific accident, everyone came together in a way that I'd never seen before. But in some ways, I always knew, I think, that we were capable of this type of a community. It's something that I don't think you really think about when you think about Los Angeles. Like you don't really think like, oh, people from LA have like an identity, a community. But I think having been separated from Los Angeles for 5 years, I think after the accident, it kind of reminded me in some ways of like the LA community is very much vibrant. It's very much there. And it's not really in your face like New Yorkers sometimes are, but if you're in LA and you really want to seek out that kind of community feel, I would say it's definitely there.
You can, and at that time it was the Lakers with Kobe's,
Yes.
or it's the Dodgers with the blue LA hat. It's one or the other, but there's not much more. I will argue that those are two big, like coming together and what you feel with regards to.
Oh. And Tupac and Snoop Dogg.
Yes. I love it. Well, but okay, not to interrupt you here. Anything else on this subject with regards to stereotypes of LA that are or aren't?
Yeah, I would also say, I don't know if this is, I don't know what people think about this, but I think we get a bad rep for being bad drivers, but I don't think we're bad drivers. That may be my personal opinion, but I really don't think we're bad drivers.
Neither do I. I don't agree with that one. Yeah, for sure. Perfect. So what are some things on the opposite end that New York is known for, and maybe some things that may be stereotypes about New York?
The first one that easily comes to mind, because I thought this was so true, was everyone in New York having like a New York accent. I don't know if it's because we're all like transplants from somewhere else, but I definitely don't think like most people have an accent. I think I've met like, I can count like on one hand people that I've really felt like, yeah, they have like a New York accent. So whoever told me that is wrong. No.
I agree with you. I mean, I don't know one that I can identify it all the time. I mean, you can if it's really strong, and thick, but otherwise it's just people talking.
Yep, exactly. I almost kind of feel like the other one with just maybe like when we think about New Yorkers, we're just kind of like, there's a stereotype that I think, we're very direct, sometimes a little bit rude, very much to the point. I think in some ways that stereotype is true. I think that's just because there's so much going on in the city, and we're just like, like we just want to get it all done. Like we want our food now so that we can get our food and then leave, like we want the subway to be here so we can get home or get to wherever we're going. So I think in some ways that stereotype is true, but it's definitely still all about the context.
Agreed. 100% agreed with you there. Anything else you would note with regards to NYC?
I don't think this is a stereotype that a lot of other people have, but just one that I'm creating for myself in my head, and constantly trying to prove myself either right or wrong. But going back to the driving thing, because clearly this means a lot to me. I don't think New Yorkers are great drivers. I see a lot of them struggle with parallel parking, which is very surprising to me. Maybe that's just the Upper East Side, but I'm always seeing someone or another just struggle with the parallel park, which is kind of insane to me because that's all we can do here in the city.
Do you know how small those spaces are sometimes though? I mean, people are on top of one another's behind. I couldn't even get into those parallels. Yeah. So kudos for those that can. So bad drivers.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't decided one way or another. So if anyone has really strong opinions, I'd love to hear it.
I love that. I love that you had a call to action on that one. Moving on to the next question, Claire, from a cost of living perspective, LA versus New York, like what is one more expensive? Is the other? Are they comparable? What's your thought there?
Yeah, I think I definitely think they're a lot more comparable, but I think Los Angeles is cheaper in terms of just how much you get, I think. And I guess like maybe just starting with like one area at a time. Housing, it's definitely comparable in the sense that you're not paying super cheap prices, but it is a little bit cheaper to me and you just get more. And so kind of from like a how much value you're getting, it's definitely not as expensive in Los Angeles compared to New York. I think in terms of food, there's only so many restaurants that we have, but it's almost kind of like in New York, you can have a certain amount of options because of just really how big New York is, which you're kind of limited. But then in LA, if you kind of extend LA to include like all of LA County, even like, you know, to some people that includes like Orange County, I think there's like, you know, a lot more food options. And I think just with more options comes more competition and lower prices. And so depending on how you kind of see that, you know, I would say food in Los Angeles is a little bit cheaper. I definitely would say groceries from a produce perspective because California makes all of its produce and New York imports them from other states or other countries. Produce is definitely way more cheaper in California and much better tasting, in my opinion. But I think that's just because it's fresh.
Yes, and I 100% adamantly believe that the sushi is the best in California
Oh, it
compared
so is.
to New
It's
York.
just so much fresher. I
Yes.
agree.
And those are all great points that you kind of noted there. So thank you for noting all that great information. And so from an overall opportunity standpoint, LA versus New York, where do you feel there's more opportunity career-wise, anything wise?
Yeah, I definitely think that's in New York. There's just something about the city that creates opportunity for people. I think in Los Angeles, it's very difficult to really break in to me from all angles. And I kind of look at it as New York is a place where everything starts. And, you know, it may not have everything, but no matter what industry you're looking for, there's going to be something in New York.
Mhm.
But the same may not necessarily be said about Los Angeles. Even if they have a bit of everything, it may not be as big of a presence. And so I definitely say New York has the upper hand. And so if you're kind of, you know, looking for new opportunities and really either want a fresh start or just you just graduated and you want something to kind of, you know, like get you started, I would definitely say look at New York first.
Oh, that is such a great tip. I love that. Thank you, Claire. And so great things to note there from an overall opportunity standpoint and from an overall well-being standpoint and way of life. What do you say, LA or New York?
My personal opinion is not New York,
Mhm.
but New York in certain things. I think my personal lifestyle is a lot more suited to Los Angeles, even though my personality is not really LA like. I prefer a lot more of like a laid back kind of a lifestyle. I also just love that in LA, it's so much more easygoing and it's not all of these obligations. But in New York, I just feel like it's a little bit crazier. And just also the fact that I am still an introvert, sometimes it gets a little bit much. And so I think it's for me over the years living in New York, it's been learning that balance, which is why I think I would naturally gravitate towards LA. But I'm still a person that feeds off of positive energy. And so that I really find in New York. So I think it's kind of a balancing act. But I would say a high level, big picture definitely leans a little bit more to LA for me personally.
And that makes sense. I kind of semi agree there, but New York still has my heart. And from the next question that I'm kind of just throwing in here is from an entertainment standpoint, you know, and restaurants and just accessibility to things like LA or New York. What do you think has better things going?
I love that. I think in sheer terms of like how much options are out there and that like excitement level, I think New York, just because everything is a lot closer by, you really kind of like, you know, get that excitement view of it. And so I would say New York from that aspect. Not saying that LA doesn't have it, but I just think with it being more of like of a sprawl of a city, it's you kind of get a little bit less of that vibe. And you definitely get more of it in New York.
Agreed. Definitely. LA, again, it's not accessible outside your doorstep, or a subway away. You have to drive. And to some, driving is not as suitable as others. So a lot more to do here in New York. Lastly, with regards to this segment, Claire, want to ask, and I kind of probably know where you're leading here, but definitely want to know, what city do you love most? Is it LA or is it New York? Or if you had to give a percentage level, what would it be?
Well, maybe let me give a percentage level because I do love both. I would say in recent days it's definitely shifted a little bit. I started off as like 90% LA, 10% New York. And I'm one of those people that is really hard to change my opinions. I would say nowadays I'm a lot more balanced. I'm kind of more on like a 60-40 kind of a breakdown, shifting towards LA. I think the increase for me has come in kind of just where I am in my life right now, where I still have a lot of big things that I'm trying to work towards. And that for me is best done in New York. And so to just taking that into account, it's definitely kind of balanced it out there a little bit. But I don't know, maybe after 2 years, when we get to like the end of my next lease agreement, I might think differently. So who knows if at that point I'm going to move back or want to stay, or, I'm like 100% New York. But for now, things have changed. But I definitely still, I love LA. I always look forward to any opportunities to get back. But I think on the flip side, coming back to New York and just, being around all the people and like standing in the middle of like Midtown, looking at the Empire State or looking at the Chrysler just makes me so happy.
100%. I feel I'm always, wherever I'm at, I'm always looking for those monumental buildings to kind of be like, I'm in New York.
I'm back.
Yeah. Even when you live here, hoping people don't take that for granted. Amazing. So thank you for essentially, rounding that up for us. I would love to kind of now dive into our third segment, Claire, where I want to go into more specific tips for the audience on, New York and LA and making a move to either one of them. And so first question being is like, what are some steps one can initially take if they're moving to New York?
Yes. For me, it's all about the neighborhood. You have to pick the best neighborhood for you. We initially picked the Upper East Side, and very specifically in Yorkville and in the 80s, because I wanted something that was a little bit more quiet, more of a neighborhood feel. I wanted to be close to things, but I don't want to be in the middle of all the action. I don't want to be able to step outside my door and be able to like go to the bar that everyone in the city is trying to hit up. And so I would say definitely do a lot of due diligence about the neighborhood, because that's really what's going to me, kind of like make or break your experience. I know people who have like moved into neighborhoods that they absolutely love, and it's just, it really kind of defines the way that they live. And I would definitely say the biggest things about living in New York that I have loved has come from kind of, being around my neighborhood, being around the Upper East Side, and just like loving all the things around me. So definitely don't skimp on the neighborhood research part.
That's an absolutely great tip. And I'm going to be a devil's advocate here on the opposite end. Please don't hate me, Upper East Siders. But so I chose Upper East Side completely out of convenience, right? And I have a long attachment to it, given my name Gossipnista and Gossip Girl on Upper East Side, right? But as a person who literally moved to New York and chose New York to be in the liveliness of it all and have it outside of my doorsteps, I don't feel I get that in the Upper East Side. Definitely.
I don't think it's meant to be. I would completely agree there. I kind of seek the opposite of wanting that. I like to be able to travel to that, but be able to kind of be removed away, which is why I love the Upper East Side. Yep. If you want more of like a neighborhood less in the middle of the action. I agree. I definitely think that's more of the Upper East Side.
Yeah, and I'm not talking like Times Square here. People definitely don't want to move there around, just in the center of that. But I love where you're at now. Everything downtown is kind of calling my name, Soho, Chelsea, West Village, Lower East Side, somewhere around there is I feel where it's more lively. Then you start getting uptown more so. So just some neighborhood differentiators there for people. But I absolutely love your tip with neighborhood being one of the best due diligence to do with steps to moving here. And what are some things essentially, Claire, that you wish you would have known about New York City before actually making a move here?
Well, first thing is don't spend money on a broker. They're absolutely useless and they're going to take all your money. I don't know if it's just because I'm like so still in like the moving mindset, but our first apartment, we used a broker to get it and it was just so pointless. Like you can find so many better listings for no broker's fee, not going through a broker. And like, it's just, that's like the most unnecessary expense that you will have. Like save it for other things. You do not need a broker. So many amazing listings you can find online. And a lot of the ones online too, they're all like no broker's fees. So don't ever think that a broker is anywhere close to necessary because it's like the most wasteful thing I ever spent my money on.
I love that transparency you just gave. And I've definitely had a lot of brokers and people on my show here. So I will stay in regards to that with that opinion of mine. And so anything else in those regards?
Yeah, I would also say, and this is kind of interesting, but I would say like when you're moving here, the first thing that I kind of feel like is you get so overwhelmed with wanting to like go to all of these things and like try all of these things. When I first moved here, that was like really what like we did. And that was what made me feel connected to the city. I think it's typical for people to think, oh, I'm not going to go to like the tourist trap places, but I almost kind of feel like it gave me a better understanding of the city, like after I went to all of the touristy places. And so I feel like if you're new to the city, you still just kind of want to get acquainted with it, but you feel like the tourist traps are, like just a tourist trap and you don't want to do that. But you don't feel connected to the city. I would definitely say, like take another look at what are some of the experiences that you're going to, like I think, for example, like the top of the rock is always an amazing experience. I would, definitely still go to all of like the museums. Like if you want to go out and see the Statue of Liberty, definitely do that. Like, take some moment and still go to Times Square. I just feel like they're tourist traps for a reason because they help people feel like they're a part of the city. And I know that I definitely really enjoyed my time going around New York and just kind of discovering all of those places and going to them for the first time and like maybe the last time, but still. I actually really did enjoy that when I first moved
You are
here.
giving me goosebumps. That was amazingly said. So thank you for telling people that, they should take advantage of this lovely city. And whether it's a tourist destination or not, that is what makes New York City. So do it, explore it. And moving on just to the final question about New York, because we're going to move into LA tips is, what are some tips for making it in New York City, would you say?
I would definitely say, measure your own success by what it is that you think success should look like. I think the great and sometimes also to a certain extent the downside of being by so many people who are so laser focused is that sometimes I think it's a little bit easy to kind of get sucked into the mindset like, oh, this is what I want, this is what I need. And to, kind of start taking other people's successes and their goals and making that our own. I think it's so important to kind of, stay true to who you are and what your success means. And just, keep in mind that everyone there is looking for something different and it's okay to be different. And just because one person is doing things one way doesn't mean that has to be for you.
Well said too. Moving on to LA. Since we're talking New York versus LA, I definitely want to give some advice on LA because it's also a great city. And so what are some steps that people can take to moving to LA if they're just moving to LA? Like what would you recommend?
Yeah, I would say first, and maybe just because, like we know people listening to this are like, like people who are from New York or lived here for a while. I would just say moving to Los Angeles is a very different experience, and to just first and foremost adjust expectations. I think things will be very different. The city is a sprawl. You do have to travel, but in some ways, because Los Angeles is made up of such a big area, like you have so much in it. So long as you're adjusting your expectations that you're not going to be living in like a metropolitan urban city, you will be absolutely fine in terms of moving there. I think a lot of people's disappointment when going there or moving there or visiting or whichever, it kind of comes from them wanting like this like New York feel, like downtown LA is really fun, but I mean that is like a tiny minuscule portion of Los Angeles, and you're not really going to get that like New York City feel there. And so I think going in there with the right expectations of what kind of city it is will really, really help offset any disappointments that there might be.
That's well said. And what kind of city would you define LA just as a whole, right? Like encompassing, we know there's different counties and areas. I mean, from the beach areas to the valley to Orange County. Like, what would you define as LA?
Oh, that's a great question. So first and foremost, I do not think the Valley is Los Angeles. I know some people like kind of think so. I think that's silly. I don't think so. I think Los Angeles is anything that is within LA County. I know some people also don't agree with that, but I think it is. I think if you live in LA County, you're from LA. I would say with regards to the OC, I kind of consider that like a fringe LA. I kind of think about it like it's like the Brooklyn to Manhattan kind of a comparison. It's like it's not like Manhattan where all of the action is. So it's not LA County where everything is, but there's still so much going on there, and it's an amazing part to be. So if you tell me you're from the OC, you want to say you're from the OC, that's fine. If you want to say you're from LA, but then I know you're also from like a place in the OC, I can also kind of get it. So I'm a little bit more flexible when it comes to OC, maybe because I like the OC. But yeah, I definitely consider anywhere in LA as LA County.
And I agree with you and like those two perspectives, but would definitely add the Valley to it, coming from one having worked in the Valley at NBC Universal and living in the Valley and knowing that the Valley is a high place of, where a lot of the movies take place, the big production movie studios are there and so forth. All the soap operas in the world come from there as well. And Studio City, Sherman Oaks, general lines along Ventura Boulevard. Beautiful. Anything kind of aside from that, that's where I start getting a little blurry too. So
yeah, no, same. I would agree with that. I think when you really get a little bit too far north, I'm just like,
yep.
Is it really though? Like, I mean, like you want to tell me Burbank is LA? Yeah, sure, fine, whatever. I agree. Close enough, right? Yeah. But like you really kind of get down there, I'm like,
Agreed. Love that we agreed on that one. And so, Claire, what are 3 tips for essentially just making it in LA?
Yeah, I would say being in LA, there's so many different groups of people depending on maybe the part of the city that you're living in or the job that you're doing. I would say the most important thing, and like I also think like this applies to anywhere that you live, is just to start finding your niche and what is it that you want to do. Start finding your own like-minded people, because I think then you'll realize that I don't maybe have to be like the stereotypical I'm gonna go to yoga and then I do nothing else for the rest of the day, kind of like a stereotype. You might find other people who are like maybe working on a tech startup and like doing something exciting there. Or if you're like in entertainment, I think there's there's definitely such a large group there. I think the most important part is that because it's kind of so spread out, you definitely have to find your people and connect to where it is that they are, because then I feel like it can get a little bit lonely, especially with not having like a main like metropolitan kind of an area. I think it can get a little bit lonely to kind of feel like, oh, I don't really have friends. But I think so long as you find the people that you really want to connect with and you start kind of like making those connections, I think that'll really alleviate that kind of fear of feeling like I'm all alone.
That is well said. Agreed. And that kind of it falls into what you said with regards to New York too. Neighborhood will probably play a little into this as well, you know, because if you set yourself a little far away, yes, you can still drive, but you'll still feel a little removed. And if you can get yourself in more of a lively area, then you're kind of in the middle of Hollywood, right? And everything. Anything I may have missed with regards to New York versus LA? Any final words with regards to this? Would love to hear your perspective.
It's crazy because I think we all grew up maybe with the mindset that, you know, you buy a house, you have kids, you raise a family, and you're there for the rest of your life. I kind of feel like we've really moved away from that, especially nowadays. Like we're so connected to each other through the internet, social media. And I also just don't think that cookie cutter lifestyle is really what is expected anymore. I just think so many people are carving their own paths. And I think it's one of those things where if you want to experience something for something different for a year, like go and do it. Like no one is stopping you. Like you do not have to fall into these like traditional mindsets of how you should be living your life or living in one place versus another. I think, you know, if you're a New Yorker that kind of feels like, hey, maybe you're a little bit tired of like the grind and you just want to get away for a while, try out LA and try out like maybe like a part of the city that's going to make you feel a little bit more closer to the action. But, you know, kind of still removed enough from, you know, the craziness of New York. Or if you're living in LA, you just feel like I want something more, but you're not sure if you can handle New York, then try moving to the Upper East Side. Try how that feels for a year and then like figure it out from there. I think there's a reason why these are the two biggest cities in the country and the most successful. I think they're really complementary, like yin and yang. And so if we all keep an open mind, then I think we will all love both cities a little bit more.
Wow, that was perfectly summed up there, Claire. I have absolutely loved your insight with regards to Los Angeles and New York City. Thank you so much, Claire, for your time.
Thank you.
Of course, but before I leave you, I definitely want to play this fun New York Minute segment game with you where I'm just going to see. Yes? Okay, perfect. You didn't even hear it, but here I go.
Oh, yeah.
Love it. Okay, so first question, favorite New York neighborhood?
Upper East Side.
Favorite New York food?
Oh, that's really difficult. I'm gonna go with something on top of my head and say Italian.
Okay, favorite season in New York City?
Oh, fall.
Favorite New York tourist destination?
Bryant Park.
Favorite non-tourist destination?
Oh, yeah, Koreatown.
Love it. Favorite holiday in the city?
Oh, Christmas.
Favorite New York subway line?
The Q, the yellow line.
Yes, agreed. Favorite New York park?
Central Park.
Favorite weekend getaway from New York?
Ooh, the Hamptons. Specifically Sag Harbor. Not really New York, but I love it there.
I love that you gave a specific area. Love it. And then so one word to describe New York City?
Vibrant.
And number one tip on how to live your best life in New York City?
Just laser in on your goals and keep your blinders on to everything else that distracts you, because there are a lot of distractions in New York City.
That was perfectly said and rounded up. Oh my gosh, Claire, again, I can't thank you enough and really appreciate your time and enjoyed our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I love this. I mean, like I've never gotten to talk so much about why I love LA. So I mean, this is great.
Thanks for tuning in to Gossipnista. Your support means the world. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with your friends. Can't wait till next week's episode? Follow along on Instagram at Gossipnista to get my latest New York happenings. But if you live and breathe New York City like I do and want even more, go to our website at gossipnista.com, explore, and subscribe to our newsletter to get insider tips first. Lastly, if you have any questions and or scoop on the city, you can email me at gossipnista@gmail.com. Until next time, you know you love me. XOXO Gossipnista.